Hello everybody and welcome to this amazing game of Barony. In this video, I'd like to do my best and cover each and every little detail there is to know about the stages of Barony. We'll go over the enemies you'll encounter, some of the items you'll find along the way, and some strategies to comfortably navigate through each stage. I've already covered the mines and the swamp, so in this video we'll focus entirely on the third stage known as the Sand Labyrinth. On screen you'll notice timestamps of each topic to make it easier for you to explore whatever piques your interest, and they can also be found in the description just for reference. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome you to the third installation of my comprehensive breakdown series. The air hangs heavy with dust and the acrid tang of stale air. Flickering torchlight dances across sandstone, casting long, menacing shadows that writhe and twist like phantoms on these dungeon walls. Each step you take echoes hollowly, swallowed by the oppressive silence that seems to press in from all sides. Here in the forgotten depths lies the Sand Labyrinth, a twisted monument to a lost civilization, its secrets buried beneath layers of whispering sand. The path winds ever onward. One moment you stand in a vast chamber, the ceiling lost in inky darkness. The next you find yourself squeezed into a narrow passage, barely wide enough to shoulder your pack. But the greatest dangers lurk not just in the shifting sands. Strange chittering echoes through the halls, hinting at the insectoid denizens that call this labyrinth home. Some scuttle towards you with unnerving speed, their mandibles clicking hungrily. The Sand Labyrinth is no place for the faint of heart. Each turn unveils a new treacherous path, each step a gamble with fate. Heed the whispers of the sand, for they may hold the key to survival. Every detail might be the difference between victory and becoming another lost soul swallowed by the ever-shifting sands. Your courage will be your greatest weapon. Tread carefully, listen closely, and trust your instincts. They may be your only guide in the Sand Labyrinth's heart of darkness. The Sand Labyrinth is notably more difficult than the swamp. In this stage, it's extremely easy to get lost in the tightly confined paths, and to add salt, traps are very common here as well. You'll find them quite easy to be a victim to thanks to the confined walls. It's also very common to have your movement restricted due to the pits littered across the labyrinth. Something to watch out for are the newly introduced spike traps, which appear quite commonly throughout the labyrinth. You'll typically find them in specific tiles, so anytime you think, hey, this looks a little interesting, let's take a peek. Just be cautious. They deal heavy damage. In fact, even with high armor and constitution stats, they consistently deal 40 damage a pop. Trust me, keep an eye out for these traps. They're not here to fuck around with. All in all, this stage is very restrictive for your generic player. Unless you have some form of levitation, the Sand Labyrinth is much more difficult to navigate, so I highly recommend obtaining some form of levitation. Following the same format as the mines and the swamp, new enemies will be scattered around, making your run much more difficult than before. Of course, previous enemies, notably goblins and trolls, can be found here as well. Starting from the least dangerous, in my opinion, are the scarabs. In fact, they can actually be a welcomed commodity when slain. They have a chance to drop tamales, which can stave off hunger quite reliably. They're not too difficult to kill by any stretch, especially considering how noisy they are. So, on top of being very squishy, they're very easy to locate. They're almost like the rats in the mines. They're useful for a quick bump in XP and a decent source for food. Next are the scorpions, which, make no mistake, can be extremely dangerous in the right circumstances. In fact, I'd even argue that they're the most dangerous enemy in this stage by far. Based on my testing, they have about an 18% chance to paralyze anyone who's been struck by their attack. This means you cannot heal, you cannot attack, nor can you run away. You are a complete victim to their moderate damage output, but coupled with another scorpion, or really any enemy whatsoever, they can very quickly end your run. They're absolutely worth keeping your distance regardless of which class you're playing as. Be very careful when challenging them, especially in groups. When challenging more than one, I'd be super cautious. In fact, in my experience, I found myself paralyzed for over 16 seconds straight. I'm not joking. It's one of the worst feelings in the game, trust me. Lastly, we have the insectoids, which surprisingly are not incredibly dangerous. They can spawn in as one of two variants, either a melee attacker or a ranged attacker. While they can be quite beefy, the weapons you should have by this time should be able to take them out pretty quickly. Something to keep an eye out for is that they can use spells, most notably and primarily a spray acid effect. In fact, it's the same one you start out with when playing as the insectoid. It deals heavy damage to equipment, inflicts a damage over time effect, and is quite difficult to avoid in close range. Both variants are able to cast this spell, so keep that in mind. The melee variants are similar to your standard melee enemy, although they spawn in with better equipment. The ranged ones are definitely more dangerous as they consistently spawn with quivers, which can knock you back pretty damn far, as well as possibly poison you or set you on fire. You can also rarely find Ziggy, a super mini boss like scarab. He functions the same as other rare enemies in the sense that he spawns with a handful of other scarabs. In fact, they're very easy to locate because of their noisy tendencies, but he's guaranteed to drop an enchanted feather upon death. It's also possible for him to drop a gemstone or a tamale, but it's pretty uncommon. He can be super dangerous for melee classes in particular, as Ziggy has permanent magic reflection, meaning you can't damage him really whatsoever with magic damage. He also fires cold spells, making it quite difficult to catch up to him, especially with all the other scarabs smacking you down. You'll want to take out the smaller ones first, then simply lay this bugger to death. Additionally, you may come across Scrabbleag, a rare yellow scorpion. Fortunately, he's not as difficult as Ziggy, but considering that it is still a scorpion, you'll definitely want to be cautious. It's pretty easy to spot him as he's bright yellow with a red stinger, as well as spawning with a handful of scorpions. He doesn't drop anything incredible, just a measly gem. It's very hard to reliably find these guys while testing drop rates because I can't really spawn them. I have to reset each level and look around, and sometimes this can take like 30 to 40 resets before I find a single one. I've killed him about 10 times so far, so as far as I'm concerned, he only really drops a gem. While the enemies are almost always going to be the primary threat, you'll also want to keep an eye out for specific equipment. These will almost always provide an immense boost in utility for the player, and some even may be completely necessary for your survival. The easiest to find, and perhaps the most safe choice passively for most classes, will be an amulet of poison resistance. These are pretty easy to find, and considering how often you'll find yourself taking poison damage from enemies here, insectoids inflict poison damage with spray acid. The ranged variants will often poison you with hunting arrows, even arrow traps can inflict poison damage, so that being said, having one on you to passively reduce pretty much like 10 to 20 extra damage from each source is extremely valuable. Pickaxes or a spell of digging will be incredibly useful as well. It's very common to navigate a long maze corridor only to find yourself in a dead end with perhaps the exit right on the other side. Even just having the means to dig through particular areas will increase your chances of survival immensely. They can also be used to quickly enter rooms that are supposed to be opened by a lever, saving valuable time. I mean, honestly, the ability to break down walls is useful in every stage, but again, considering how often you find yourself running straight into a dead end, you'll be thankful you saved one. Also, just a side note, both of the secret areas in this stage are only accessible by breaking a wall. I'll cover more on that later on. Lastly, and perhaps the most useful item of all, is almost always the Ring of Levitation, or really some means of levitation. As I mentioned before, this stage is littered with pits, impeding your movement entirely. The ability to simply float over these areas is, well, it's unbelievably useful. In fact, you can just hover above the pits and boom, you instantly avoid 5 of the 7 enemy types in the labyrinth. Obviously keep an eye out for ranged enemies, but again, they only make up about 30% of the enemies you'll encounter. It's not necessarily required for this level, but if you find yourself with the option to levitate, I'd highly recommend swapping, or at the very least, consider placing the item in your hotbar. That way you can instantly equip the item whenever you need it most. There are 2 optional locations you can decide to enter in the Sand Labyrinth. The first one, which I just plainly call Sokoban, is at level 11, and the Minotaur Maze is at level 13. Both are only accessible after breaking a wall surrounded by lava. Sokoban is the first level to explore and is very straightforward. The room is filled with boulders, which all must be pushed off the map without being broken in order to receive the artifact, Genie's Braces, which I hope I'm saying that right, I'm pretty sure it's Genie's. Regardless, it is possible to break a few boulders if they get stuck, but when too many are destroyed, the artifact will not spawn. As long as you're paying attention to the locations of the boulders, it's fairly easy to complete. After properly completing the puzzle, you'll be rewarded with the Genie's Braces, which grant the player magic resistance and a few armor points, as well as about 3,000 gold. It's definitely worth the time it takes to successfully complete the puzzle. I mean, it really only takes like 3 minutes. If for any reason you've destroyed a boulder, a random enemy will spawn and become hostile. It will also reduce the total amount of gold you receive, but again, you are allowed to break 1, so as long as you're patient, earning the artifact isn't too difficult. The next area you can explore is the Minotaur Maze, definitely the most dangerous optional area to be visited by far. This is because after you pick up the red orb from the pedestal or walk too far, the Minotaur will spawn and chase you throughout the maze. I don't really think I need to explain why he's so dangerous. Although it's not required, I would highly recommend having either a pickaxe, a spell of digging, or a spell of opening. These can all be extremely useful to navigate safely through the maze in the event you find yourself too weak to kill the Minotaur. Your only options are to avoid him and run away, or kill him, both of which are viable. However, killing him is actually much easier than it sounds. With just a few followers and a couple of slowing effects, the Minotaur can be slain pretty quickly. You'll probably lose a few followers, probably even all of them, but you'll be able to explore the maze very safely and acquire every item. There is also another artifact to be found here as well, which is the Gungnir, a spear that pierces armor. Now, as I mentioned before, killing the Minotaur isn't super difficult as long as you have the right strategy. If you're playing with some friends, have at least one person shoot some slowing spells at him, while melee classes use the shield and attempt to block the Minotaur's attacks. With a few followers, however, you can just keep your distance and use any form of range damage to slowly chip away at his health, whether that's a bow, or using magic, or any throwable weapons. Regardless of your choice, it's important that you grab the red orb from the pedestal. This can be used later on to increase your strength and constitution by 8 points. Or it can be sold to the mysterious merchant, but no one really does that. Additionally, you may even opt to place the orb in the pedestal near the exit to drastically reduce the Minotaur's speed, making it incredibly easy to kite him backwards. It unfortunately doesn't last forever. I think it lasts about 20 to 25 seconds, maybe even 30, but just remember to pick the orb back up. In order to exit the level, you must navigate to the end of the maze and simply exit through the portal. If you're curious, the layout of the level is exactly the same every time, so if you need a little cheat sheet, just pause here. Overall, the Sand Labyrinth will pose a more dangerous challenge than the swamps. It's not a massive difference. In fact, I think it's a very comfortable challenge. Enemies are more difficult for sure, and the environment is a bit harder to navigate, but it's at this point when you acquire much stronger equipment. You'll find better spells, sharper swords, and bulkier armor. And as I mentioned before, you'll definitely want to keep some form of levitation effect for this level. Trust me, it makes a world of a difference. Food tends to be a little more difficult to find here as well, so make sure to keep an eye out for some tamales. As far as enemies go, most of them are melee, so be sure to keep your distance if possible, and utilize the open areas, specifically with the pits. Against ranged enemies, try to take them out as quickly as possible. Magic and range classes have a pretty easy time killing them, so as long as you keep your distance, it won't be too difficult. Melee classes should opt to sneaking up on them and taking them out, or just simply get in the habit of blocking the arrows with a shield or even a torch if you need to. Other than that, the other enemies shouldn't give you too hard of a time. Scorpions can be very annoying, but they're pretty squishy. Just don't underestimate them. Scarabs aren't too difficult to kill. I mean, they are pretty quick, but you can usually kill them in like 3 to 4 hits, maybe even 5. Overall, the Sand Labyrinth isn't the most difficult stage with the right approach. It's a stage that goes by pretty quickly in my opinion. Just make sure to keep an eye out for that pesky loot that's hiding in the dark corners and dead ends, and don't be ashamed to play extra safe here too. It's even more confined than the mines, so it's pretty easy to run in head first, straight to your gravestone. In any case, I hope you found this guide useful. I try my best to cover everything there is to know about each stage, so I hope this was sufficient enough to have a reliable source for in-depth information. If there's anything you feel like I missed, or if you have any questions or feedback, you're more than welcome to post a comment and I'll be happy to respond. If I don't get to it quick enough, this wonderful community we've built up, consisting of almost 500 of you guys, should be happy to help as well. I seriously cannot overstate how happy I am to make these videos for you guys, so if you wouldn't mind, please help me improve when and where I can. They take a very long time to make, especially with my novice editing skills. That being said, I greatly appreciate you for watching. I hope you're having a fantastic 2024 and keeping up with your resolutions. And keep an eye out. Maybe we'll come across each other searching for loot in the Sand Labyrinth.